I guess I'll rank the albums. Sisters of Mercy. You gotta laud the Sisters of Mercy for sticking up for just straight up rock music in an age of gothic nonsense. They didn't need the silly hallmarks of goth to prop up their music, and they proved that by throwing all the hallmarks in and showing, hey, this is the stuff we don't need. Of course, the lineup is very different across the different releases, and they're still around and still writing songs that they refuse to make albums out of, but I rank the albums. Although, of course, I start with the one that's a compilation of all the early singles and B-sides, and it was released as a compilation later, but in material it's earlier. It's kind of exactly what you're being offered by that, and exactly what you'd expect. So the A-sides are very worthwhile. Some of the B-sides are, but there's also a dub mix and dicking around and whatever. The low-budget simplicity of their sound in the early 80s is resonant. I think it feels like any teen bedroom rock where they'll just string together whatever they can with the sounds accessible and one-finger guitar lines. And a lot of these tracks seem recorded in a hushed way as to not wake the neighbors. That lack of dynamic range at this point holds this compilation down a bit. I feel the drummer at this point sounds pretty feeble, and he got his strength later. He kind of reinvented himself several times along the way. The sequence instrumentation can't live up to the theatrics the vocals are going for, and really that's a description that the Sisters later used to their strength, but here it's not quite there yet. Maybe it came across in live performances. The Sisters in this era weren't really tight enough. Let's just say my CD copy of this skips a bit, and I don't really think the skipping detracts from it. This is one of those compilations where skipping 1 in 4 tracks will tighten it up to an overall better compilation, but there's no actual argument for excluding these B-sides. That's the whole point of the compilation. There was another early single that was released by a different label, so didn't get on this.
It's the best one.
Then an intentional album and a strengthened lineup, technically a few years into their career, and that patience has paid off. This is a really hard-hitting debut. If nothing else, and there is plenty else, but if nothing else, I must always praise Andrew for bringing those of us with lower voices into the rock singer pantheon. I know there's a bit of Cohen in there, but making it properly rock. That lower octave, thank you for unlocking that. With talent in every corner, this is the Sisters vindicating the promise they showed on earlier singles. Then it's time to get bitchy. It's a very appropriate title for something made specifically to ruin someone's day. Yeah, I know it's a German word. Yeah, you can go and read the backstory if you want. Do read the backstory, but go and read their website. Their website's very fun. But put simply, this album was thrown together quickly. It was put simply to undermine the efforts of those who used to be in the band. It's possible that's justifiable. I'm just here for the music. And for someone whose purpose is simply trying, this is surprisingly good. I've had the compliment surprisingly good before now. It's really comforting to be called surprisingly good. I think the creators of this wouldn't mind though. It's a kind of techno with some of the spirit of what the Sisters have shown thus far, just without the live instrumentation. So sequence drums, sequence bass, and largely spoken vocals. It is good and worth hearing. There's just only 5 tracks on it, and they stretch out for over half an hour, and they're quite stretched out, considering that they have a few seconds of musical content each. The first 3 tracks justify that. One of them was upcycled for a later release, though. Then there's one that was obviously made after hearing 19 by Paul Hardcastle, and one that, even in the releases of a band whose kind of calling card is extending songs too long, is clearly extended too long. Look, no proper depth to this, but I will say, if they'd thought about it a bit more, it could have gone between here. It ain't going between here, and the very point of this involved not thinking about it a bit more. But still, it proves what you can do with spite, and the help of a few good friends who share your ambition to betray your last set of once good friends. So after getting the important priority of hurting other people out of the way, here's another album. This one follows up on what Gift was somewhat offering. Brings it back to a rock band-ish context, but still very sequenced. There's that piano ballad where it's clearly a MIDI piano, but that's kind of for the better. By dialing down live instrumentation to only what's necessary, they've created a very cold and dark sound. I don't know if it's really fair to call this a plurality of people at this point. Andrew obviously deserves nearly all of the credit. Some participation from Jim Steinman, which makes a very fun juxtaposition because he's known for his ornate and very complex song structures, and he brings a flavour of that to otherwise very simplistic musicianship, and it earns that pomp. It's a very welcome combination. That turning up on a couple of these tracks is just enough because the rest of them still maintain that kind of dynamic depth without necessarily needing to go silly with it. I decided since the original CD version had 10 tracks, and that's the canon album I'm ranking, and it puts it so close to their first and not last album, but I eventually decided that it's going to have to slot just underneath. These two are both obviously absolute gems, working in different versions of the same motifs. The one with more musicianship is just about getting my vote, but don't let that undermine the power in Floodland. Look, I know they claim not to be goth, but once you have a melody with the rhythm, not the notes, just the rhythm, that immediately means you're goth. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules, it's just surname's law of goth. Then another almost complete lineup replacement. I don't need to keep track of all that. This is the Sisters going American, going garish, going kind of hokey. A tiny bit cock rock, but with tongue firmly in cheek. Whose cheek? I don't know. Still with that very sequenced sound, they don't really go for the breadth of the stadium rock they are emulating. It's a tinny and thin version, but it was also the right thing to do. It means it's still Sisters, and it keeps a layer of detachment there. Now, with 2 perfect albums behind them, and with only 8 tracks on this one, it's got to be an absolutely perfect game for this to match up to them. That didn't happen, but well more than half of it is very worthwhile. It's just got one of those songs where they pretend that one tiny riff is enough for 5 minutes. I think there's a longer version of Dr. Jeep as well. And a bit of kind of plain songwriter stuff. But they were also onto something good as well, which makes this an easy placement. Impressively, a new they other than Andrew again, have a second instance of making a record specifically out of spite, though this time it's not got the twist of being any good. Andrew needed a new alias for his sister release that didn't release, and I'm putting it on screen. It's over an hour, it's nonsense trolling, and it's just some machine farts and threatening mutters. If a Warner executive actually had to listen to this, then it almost makes me feel sorry for a capitalist, but they probably just accepted that we're getting nothing more out of this band. Unless you're Rockstar Games, who should have made a game in which Andrew goes shooting all his former bandmates, or at least Dr. Avalanche goes shooting all his former bandmates, and the press as well. Or the new material, they've, again, a new they played live in the last few decades. Quite a lot of it lately. Not relevant for what I'm doing, but I guess they're still making songs where they don't have to set down a studio version, which is where I seem to be recently.